Hey guys, how you going? Hope you're all doing very well. This evening I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm actually going to be commencing a new series. Now I've done a few series in the past on my channel. I know they have been few and far between, but don't worry, I'm looking to get back into it and continue them. So hopefully you haven't lost interest, and hopefully you gain a bit of interest in tonight's series. So tonight I'm going to be dedicating a series to horror franchises. Franchises are not something I really talk about, so I thought, all right, I'm going to take the opportunity and I'm going to start talking about some of the more well-known franchises and giving my honest thoughts on them. So I'm going to be judging them as individual films and then the overall franchise experience that I got. And so tonight we're going to be starting with Eli Roth's Cabin Fever. Now, Cabin Fever was about a flesh-eating virus that took a group of friends by storm, and it's not only a visually horrifying film, but it's a psychologically horrifying film. And so it was released 20 odd years ago, but it resonates with the viewer even more since the coronavirus pandemic. Now, it's not a flesh-eating virus, but it's still that idea of paranoia and self-preservation, how desperation can actually produce irrational behaviors from a seemingly ordinary individual. Now, there's none finer example than here in Australia when seemingly normal people were fighting over toilet paper. And in calmer times, that's something you wouldn't even imagine. But when fear sets in, all bets are off. You know, people behave in very strange ways. And so that was also the very psychologically damaging effect that Cabin Fever had. And I thought that was the best aspect of Cabin Fever, is that not only is it a gore fest, it's also a very psychologically tormenting film because paranoia starts to set in. And when self-preservation also sets in, this is where they start to pit against each other. And so it's a very horrifying thought. It's very rare to say that a film that's over 20 years old actually resonates even stronger with an audience, but Cabin Fever is definitely one of them. So this is Eli Roth's brainchild. This is what really put him on the horror map, and this is what got him a lot of fans. A lot of people loved the first film, and so coming into this movie, I was expecting to love it a lot more than I actually did. I believe that this is an incredibly overrated film. That's not saying it's a terrible movie, because there are elements in the film that I really enjoyed. But unfortunately, the biggest criticism of the Cabin Fever original is that the tone is incredibly inconsistent. It's a very messy film. You've got some really serious moments, and then you've got some comedic moments that just don't fit into the experience. It doesn't feel like a horror comedy. And so when you've got these horror aspects and the serious levels of, frightening an audience, all of a sudden something comes out of nowhere that's very odd in a way that it's trying to make you laugh, but it just doesn't feel like it fits. And so I felt as though the consistency in the tone was all over the place, and it became an incredibly disjointed experience. I thought the gore effects, it's not as extreme as a lot of people make it out to be, but it didn't need to be, because that had that psychologically affecting sort of aspect as well. But unfortunately, that doesn't really intensify enough, because of the fact the comedic element wasn't very natural. I felt as though it was quite forced. And so there were moments where I felt as though it was quite cringeworthy, but there were moments that were scattered through the film that were very, very good. And so I just didn't feel as though the consistency was there, and I didn't enjoy it as much as a lot of people did. But knowing that this is going to be a franchise with numerous other films coming into it, I was hoping that it was going to capitalize upon the mistakes and make it even bigger and better. But unfortunately, Ty West's Spring Fever, which is the second installment, I thought that was an absolute disgrace of a film. This is a director who is very well established, but it didn't feel like he was even trying in this movie. It actually felt like the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, in that the first film was serious, although this movie, the Cabin Fever original, isn't as serious, but the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was very serious. But Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 was almost like it was making fun of it. It was a parody of the first one. And so it didn't have any respect for that first film. Therefore, it damages the first film's reputation to some extent. And that's exactly what Cabin Fever 2, Spring Fever, did to Cabin Fever, in that it was making fun of it. It wasn't trying. It was just really gross out humor. It was very, very lazy filmmaking. And I didn't like any part of it. Yes, the effects were, as I said, very extreme, but it was extreme for the sake of being extreme. And it loses all of that psychological torment that the first film produced. And so it was a massive step down, and I definitely feel as though it's a massive black mark against Ty West's filmography. And so that was a movie that you could pretty much just scrape away from history and pretend it didn't even exist, because you're not missing out on anything. If you like the first Cabin Fever, the second Cabin Fever was an absolute abomination, and it doesn't even deserve to be mentioned. And so I'm not going to go any further into Cabin Fever 2. It was just really, really badly done. So coming into Cabin Fever 3, Patient Zero, I was expecting more of the same thing, but I was very surprised surprised to see that Cabin Fever Patient Zero is probably the best film of the franchise. Now, I know that's a very, very unpopular opinion. I know a lot of people out there are probably going to kill me for saying that, but for me, I thought it was the most consistent movie out of them all, in that it was a very serious film and it wasn't trying to throw in other elements that were very random that took you out of the experience. I thought it knew exactly what it wanted to be. It wanted to be a gross out sort of film, but it wasn't making fun of itself. It wasn't trying to alleviate a mood that was already lighthearted. And so it's not a movie that's going to disturb you. Yes, visually it's going to disturb you, and it's not so much about that self-preservation that the first film had, but at least it was very serious. And so that's something I really appreciated. I actually enjoyed that film, and I might be in the very small minority that actually enjoyed it, but if I'm being serious, I actually thought the third film was better than the first two. So coming into the remake, again, I was expecting a really bad experience, but again, I was surprised to see that I actually felt as though it was once again better than the original. And again, a lot of people are going to kill me for saying this, but for me, it capitalized on the mistakes that the original made, in that it's not as funny, it's not trying to be humorous, it's actually trying to give you a serious experience in a flesh-eating virus. And so I thought as though that actually capitalized upon it. A lot of people say it's a pointless remake, and I thought as though Cabin Fever #1 wasn't actually even good enough for a remake, but I thought, all right, well, at least, although they're it's recycling the same ideas, at least it's a lot more serious, and so I actually felt as though it had its place. So all of these movies, the strong inconsistencies in the whole franchise is basically what sums up the first film, in that you've got the first movie that had a lot of issues with it, but some very memorable qualities. The second movie that was absolutely horrible. The third movie that was a lot better in the serious tone. And then the remake that didn't need to be remade, but it still was. But that was also a very serious film. So you got two movies that are very serious, one movie that's an absolute disgrace, and another movie that had its issues, but was actually fairly decent. So overall, you have a really disjointed experience, a really, really inconsistent feeling that you get from the Cabin Fever franchise, and overall the whole franchise left me feeling a little bit unsatisfied. I will say that number 3 is the best, then I would say the remake, and then the first film, and in a very distant fourth place is Cabin Fever Spring Fever. So that was absolutely pathetic, and I wouldn't even mention that again. So if you like Cabin Fever and you want to share your thoughts, please feel free, but for me it's an overrated franchise, but I couldn't help but feel it could have been really, really good, but it just doesn't take itself seriously enough to actually produce something that is worthwhile. Alright guys, that's it for today's video. Until next one, keep watching movies and I'll see you later.